Now we're going to take an algebraic expression and create it from the sentence. In the previous video, we were given the expression, turned it into a sentence. Now we're going to do the opposite. So let's start off with this first one. A number t more than 6. A number t more than 6. So there are two different ways to write this, but there's one that I really prefer to write. First of all, a number t just means the variable t. And then more than is the mathematical phrase that means plus. When you see more than, that means addition. And then, of course, our last thing we have in the sentence is 6. So one way you could write this is t plus 6. However, with addition, the order does not matter. And you can prove this very simply by saying, well, 2 plus 3 is 5, but what happens if I add those in a different order? What happens if I do, what happens if instead of doing 2 plus 3, I do 3 plus 2? Still 5. So the order in which I add two numbers does not change the solution. So I could write t plus 6, and I can also write 6 plus t. So both of these are correct. I'm going to encourage you, though, when you see a number t more than 6, that you write it out as the second way here, 6 plus t. I want you to think of the phrase more than as being something added on to the end. Now, you may ask, who cares? If they're both correct, why make a big deal about more than, meaning it goes on the end instead of putting it at the beginning? And the answer is because although more than does not matter, less than does. Let's take a look at the second example. 10 less than the product of 7 and f. 10 less than does not mean 10 minus. This means minus 10. And in subtraction, the order matters. If I said, what is 2 minus 3? The answer is -1. But if I switch the order, 3 minus 2, the answer is now +1. In subtraction, the order matters. So when we say 10 less than, we cannot do 10 minus. It has to be -10. Okay, so we're going to end with -10. Well, 10 less than what? The first part has 10 less than. The second part says the product of 7 and f. So product is another one of our fancy math words. The product of means multiplication. What are we going to multiply together? Well, it says the product of 7 and f, so that means 7 times f. So 7 times f. What we learned in the last video, though, is that if you are multiplying two things together, you don't have to use the multiplication symbol. You can use what's called implied multiplication. And implied multiplication means if there's no symbol, we assume that it's multiplication. So this 7 multiplied by f is fine to write with the dot in the center, or even you could do the old school multiplication symbol, the x, if you want to, that's fine. But the most efficient, the most mathematical way to write it is to just do 7f minus 10. That means 7 multiplied by f minus 10, or the way the sentence was originally written, 10 less than the product of 7 and f. Let's look at this last one here. It says 2/3 of the volume V. Of is the key word in this sentence. Of is also a mathematical word, believe it or not, and of means multiplication as well. So when you see of, that means to multiply. So what are the two things we're multiplying? It says 2/3, then it says of, that's multiplication. So let's start off with 2/3 times. of the volume V. So V is a variable in this case that represents volume. So 2/3 times V. And just like on the previous example, when it's multiplication, we do not need the multiplication symbol. It would be totally acceptable, in fact, preferable for us to write it just as 2/3 V using that implied multiplication that says, again, if there's no symbol, it means we are multiplying.